We see a boy called Percival running in an open field when he spots a rocky bird in the air. It's a pretty rare sight to see one flying around here, so he calls down to his grandpa, who clearly has never skipped arm day, to help him catch the bird for dinner. With nothing else at hand, the old man finds a pitchfork and chucks it several stories into the air, effortlessly striking down the bird. As the bird falls off a cliff, Percival isn't about to let that meat slip out of his grasp so easily, so he leaps off the cliff and grabs the bird before catching himself on a rock just in time to avoid falling to his death. They then head back inside, where Grandpa leaves the preparation of the bird up to Percival, and he does it all with one hand. After that, they sit down to eat the well-done meat, but in the background, we see some ominous purple magic on the bird, which I'm pretty sure is a not good sign. Once done eating, they then head outside for a light-sparing match, of which, unsurprisingly, Grandpa is the victor after a brief struggle, but Percival takes some pride in knowing that he put up a good fight against him this time. Grandpa goes to wash the dishes while Percival is still celebrating, but then he suddenly remembers something very important. It's Percival's birthday soon, and he forgot all about it. He drops everything he was doing and runs back up to the house to find Percival, who is currently taking a leak. He tells him that it's going to be his birthday tomorrow, but he doesn't seem all that interested in it and had even forgotten how old he was before this conversation. He'll be turning 16 tomorrow, which means he will be an adult in this world. He's excited because he thinks that means he will finally be allowed to drink some beer, but while he is old enough to do taxes and join the army, he is still too young for alcohol. Grandpa leads him to the top of the cliff and shows him the vast expanse of space that extends beyond this island, just waiting to be adventured, places to see, things to do, and he may even find the One Piece. However, Percival doesn't really care about any of that and just wishes to continue his daily routine here with Grandpa on this island. That night, as they eat their dinner, Grandpa talks about how Percival's father went out on adventures as soon as he turned 16, but as far as Percival knows, his dad is dead. Still, Grandpa asks if Percival really isn't lonely after all the time he has spent on this remote island, but he is perfectly content because he has Grandpa there with him. Later that night, he can't sleep and wanders outside to look at the stars. He thinks about all the wondrous things that his grandpa had told him about, and he is so full of excitement that he can't sit still at all. However, he's still happy with his current life because he has his grandpa with him, so he doesn't want to change that. That right there is a death flag if I've ever seen one. Percival falls asleep and wakes up to find this knight pulling up to the island in his floating boat. The knight was talking about how his rock bird familiar got shot down earlier, so the person he is looking for must be here. And that is when Percival comes up to him and expresses his amazement to see a knight in a flying boat. The knight says he is searching for someone by the name of Varghese, and Percival, with no sense of stranger danger, tells him that that's the name of his grandpa, also asking how he knows him. The knight says that he knew Varghese 16 years ago. He was still a holy knight, so he is here for a visit. Percival doesn't question anything he said, why a friend would come for a visit in full battle gear, or why Grandpa would not mention such a close friend in conversations, so he tells the knight that Grandpa is currently on the other side of the hill making breakfast. So having gotten the information he needed, the knight goes over there to confront Varghese, while he tells Percival that he can play with this flying boat to keep him busy. Percival is elated at first and is having a blast in the boat, but then he slowly realizes that everything that just happened was mad saz, and he basically just told a stranger in a suit of armor and a sword where his grandfather is. It finally dawns on him that he may have just screwed up big time, and he runs over to go help his grandpa. Meanwhile, on the other side of the mountain, Varghese was busy cutting up some carrots for breakfast when the knight walks up behind him and points out that he is using the sword that he had used as a holy knight to cut up vegetables now. Varghese recognizes the voice and knows that the knight is not one to spend the first 5 minutes of a fight talking, so he immediately uses his sword to block the incoming strike, but gets blown back into his house. He remains largely unharmed, so he jumps out and leaps forward to counterattack the knight. Their swords clash, but Varghese is unable to break through the knight's defense, and once an opening is created, the knight uses his power to have Varghese looking like the new Twitter logo and destroy his house for bonus points. Percival had arrived a little too late and just witnessed his grandpa getting carved out, so he yells for the knight to stop. The knight obviously isn't going to stop just because he was asked to, and fires a shot at Percival, telling him that he is next in line to die at his hands. Percival grabs one of the rocks that was launched by the blast and throws it at the knight before jumping down. The rock didn't manage to do any damage, so Percival tries using a bigger rock this time, but it still does nothing, and Percival is now in the direct line of fire for one of those shots. Grandpa comes up behind him and prevents the knight from shooting Percival. He then yells for him to run away while he still has the chance, but Percival doesn't want to leave his beloved grandpa to die here. However, the knight has no intention of letting either of them leave here alive, so as he says this, he cuts Varghese open several more times in an instant, and then hits Percival with a blast that I can only describe as overkill. Percival is about to fall back, but with the last of his strength, he tries to punch the knight. However, his little arms aren't going to do much damage, and he coughs up some blood before getting punted backwards and falling in defeat and looks up at the sky as it starts snowing. Varghese asks the knight why he would come here to kill him now of all times, and he explains that there was a prophecy foretold a few days ago, where 4 knights of the apocalypse would bring about the downfall of the Lord King Arthur. They have no real clues on who the knights of the apocalypse might be, so he thought he might as well come here and kill Varghese, just in case. Even if that was his reasoning, he didn't have to kill Percival like that, but he says it was all for the greater good as he leaves. Percival gets up and apologizes to his grandpa for being too weak to protect him, but I'm more curious about how his body is still in one piece after that blast that went in, out, and through a mountain behind him. His grandpa tells him that he shouldn't need to protect someone like him and should find someone more deserving. Percival believes that this must be divine punishment for him lying about being satisfied with staying on the island forever and not wanting to go on adventures, so to calm him down, Varghese also admits that he was actually really happy when Percival said he was perfectly satisfied with just staying with him here. This gets Percival to smile a bit, but Varghese soon coughs up more blood, reminding him that he doesn't have much time left to live. He has something he wants to say before he passes on, so he tells Percival that the knight's name is Ironside and he is actually Percival's father. This shocks Percival because, for one, Varghese had told him that his father died when he was younger, and 2, what kind of father would slice his own son into 4 pieces, just in case? This backstory is too long for Grandpa to start explaining right now, so he tells Percival to go and find Ironside if he wants to know the full story. He's sorry, but Percival is going to have to start his new journey alone for the first time. It's going to be tough on him, but Varghese knows he can handle it because he raised Percival to be really tough. The next day, Percival wakes up and looks over at his dead grandpa, filling him with deep sadness. He buries his body and is left feeling empty inside because his whole world just came crashing down before him. He starts fixing some of the damage done to the house and finds a box underneath a table. In it is a set of new clothes that Varghese had spent several nights sewing for Percival to be able to use on his adventures. A few days pass as Percival has created a monument to his grandpa and is about to leave on his journey. He puts on the helmet and flicks back his cape before tripping on that same cape. Percival begins climbing down the island, but even after an entire day of climbing, he has still made almost no progress at all and can't even see past the clouds. After a little more climbing, he's finally able to see the ground, but in his excitement, he lets go of the cliff and falls to the ground where he finds this creature. He looks up at the creature and thinks about how he has never seen anything like it back on the island. He also introduces himself to it and tells it that he just climbed down from that tall island behind him and is currently looking for a place where other people like him live. However, it doesn't seem to understand a word he just said and begins to walk away from him. Percival keeps following it, so it starts running away from him, eventually leading him to a performing street group. The leader of the group, Katz, throws paper in the air and has them catch on fire, while Elva does a trick with a disappearing monkey and a hoop. Katz now wants the last guy to do his trick, but he isn't interested in practicing because there is no one around to see him. However, Percival was watching and was thoroughly amazed by their amazing routine. The others are confused as to where a kid like Percival could have come from because they are currently in the middle of nowhere, but Percival wants them to do some more magic tricks, so Donnie tries to take advantage of the situation and get Percival to pay them for it. However, having lived his entire life on a single island, Percival has no idea what paying even means. Donnie then says he will take Percival's stuff as payment for doing his trick, so he does the trick and makes Percival float to his utter joy and amazement. But while Percival was busy enjoying himself, Donnie had already put the others in the cart and began running away with Percival's stuff. The others tell him that what he just did was pretty messed up and he shouldn't leave a kid like that alone in the forest after taking his stuff. Donnie realizes that that kind of behavior puts him firmly in the jackass territory, so he's about to turn around, but then Percival shoots past him with great speed after sprinting to catch up to them. Donnie apologizes because he realized what he did was wrong, but also because he fears for his life after Percival's great feat of strength. Percival tells them he is looking for someone and asks how he can find that person. He tells them the name of the person he is looking for is Ironside, but they don't know who that could be. They ask why he is looking for this person, so Percival explains that Ironside is his father and also killed his grandpa, so they think he is on a quest for revenge. Percival doesn't know whether he wants revenge or not. That is why he wants to go to Ironside and ask him directly why he killed grandpa and why he only showed up now. There are many questions he wants to have answered, but for now, he just wants to beat him up really bad. The group doesn't recognize the name, but they are heading to a village soon, so he might be able to find some information there if he goes with them. Percival is delighted, however. Dunny says they aren't going to take him for free, however. This time, he just asks Percival to do a trick so he can go with them. They give him a bow and an arrow to see how well he can aim with it, but he somehow manages to nearly hit Dunny, who is standing behind him. They still take Percival anyway since they are a performing troupe and are going to the village anyway for their next performance. Percival asks if the tricks he saw them do before were their performance and tells them that it was amazing and looked just like magic. However, Donnie doesn't like having to do petty magic tricks just to make a living. Katz explains that they are a group of people who have had their dreams of becoming holy knights crushed. At the mention of holy knights, Percival remembers Ironside mentioning that both he and Percival's grandpa were holy knights previously. The others are surprised to hear this because that means he is the son of the holy knight. They ask what country Ironside is meant to be from, but Percival has no idea what a country is, so he isn't able to answer. Just then, two people from the village come running up to them and begging for help. Their village is being attacked by a wolf, so they ask Donnie to use his horse to go and call some holy knights. But since he thinks it is just a regular wolf, he believes they should be more than enough to get rid of it by themselves, and in exchange, he will have the villagers give them food and a place to stay for the night. However, upon arrival, he realizes that the wolf is too much for them to handle and hightails it out of there to go call the holy knights. As they are fleeing, Percival jumps out of the cart to deal with the wolf, since there are still people in danger here. Dunny thinks it's suicide to go in and fight that thing alone when he is just a kid, but Percival doesn't want to let anyone suffer, so he will make sure to be able to protect them. He takes his stance and yells that he's going to kill and eat the wolf, so he takes out his arrows and fires 2 shots at it. However, he has got his accuracy stat at -100, so his arrows fly back towards him and strike him in the head and pin his cape to the ground. The wolf is about to take the chance to strike Percival, but Dunny steps in to save him. He gets knocked back and hurt, so Percival gets angry and decides to give up on the bow and just use what he's good with, his hands. After blocking the wolf's second strike, he jumps up and slaps the instincts and consciousness out of it, leaving everyone amazed and the wolf on the ground. As everyone begins to celebrate that they are safe, we see one of those familiar crests on the wolf, and that creature that met him initially is watching from a nearby cliff. Through a magic crystal, a knight is surprised that Percival was able to defeat one of his familiars, so he will be going in personally next to face him. Back in the village, the villagers are talking about how strange it is for a monster of that size to appear in a village. And even worse, there have been reports of similar things happening in the neighboring villages, so they are pretty worried. Donnie is being patched up by Katz after the wounds he sustained from protecting Percival, and he asks where Percival went off to, being told that he was taken by Elva to the lake to wash up a bit. In the lake, we see Elva shocked by the scar that Percival has on his chest, and even more shocked when the scar runs all the way through to his back, once again bringing up the question, how the hell did he survive that by just sleeping it off? Elva tells Percival that he acts pretty mature for his age despite such a terrible wound because she still believes that he is a kid, but Percival was too busy looking at her and wondering why something was rising. A short while later, Percival is soaking in the lake and thinking about how Donnie is actually a pretty nice guy since he jumped in to protect him after only knowing him for a few minutes. While resting his head on the legendary cushions, Elva tells him that Donnie probably did it because seeing Percival jump in to save the people got him all fired up. Doing something like that makes it seem like he hasn't given up on becoming a holy knight yet. Percival asks what a holy knight is, so she explains that they are people who use their power to oppose evil and uphold justice with their great magic power. He then asks what magic is, and if it has anything to do with the tricks they were doing earlier. She tells him that it is pretty much the same thing, but that their power is far too weak to be considered enough to become a holy knight. They get back to the rest of the people in the village, and they all want to celebrate with their hero, so they all toast to Percival, and he finds the drink to be really delicious. He asks what it is, and is told that it's berry juice. Donnie says he would have liked some alcohol, but Elva points out that he is only 16 years old, just like her. Percival hears this and tells them that he is also 16, causing Elva to flush with embarrassment after all she did with Percival in the lake. Anyway, they carry on with the celebration and party a bit, then Percival begins to ask around if anyone has heard of Ironside, but no one seems to know anything about him, which begins to frustrate him a lot. He yells at the top of his lungs for Ironside to show himself, but Elva tells him that there is no point in yelling because he isn't here to hear him. However, someone else hears Percival screaming for Ironside and says he knows that name. It is the Black Knight. He comes down from his floating shield and talks about how he only came here to find the kid that killed his familiar, but instead finds that Percival, who was reported to have been killed, is still very much alive. He asks if Varghese managed to survive as well, but unfortunately, Varghese didn't have the levels of plot armor that Percival has and died from his wounds. Katz recognizes that this guy is a holy knight and tries to get him to leave Percival alone, but I mean it's a holy knight, so Katz gets backhanded away. The holy knight kind of apologizes for hitting Katz so hard since he only wanted to push him away a little and didn't mean to give him a concussion from it. Percival asks the knight why he knows his grandpa and Ironside. So he explains that he is Pelegard, someone who knew both his father and grandfather. If he knows Ironside, then Percival tells him that he has until the count of 5 to tell him where he is, and Pelegard is busy talking about how much he likes Percival for not being scared to face a holy knight. They aren't getting anywhere by talking, so Percival and Pelegard prepare to fight. The crowd is smart and runs away so they don't get caught up in what is definitely going to be a chaotic battle. Percival charges forward and surprises Pelegard because he is coming to him without a weapon, but as Percival lands a kick on him and manages to push him back along with his heavy armor, he is thoroughly impressed by the boy's potential. Percival says that if he wins, then Pelegard will have to tell him where Ironside is, to which he agrees, but as he knocks Percival down, he makes his own conditions where if he wins, then Percival must go with him and train under him to maximize his potential. He then strikes Percival with his mace, but he's able to block the blow and leap forward to strike Pell once more. He then unleashes a flurry of attacks on Pell but gets his head palmed. Pell praises Percival for having the courage to leap into danger to protect the weak and the will to not falter, but he tells him to take the fight seriously and at least use magic if he isn't going to be using a weapon. But Percival says he doesn't have any magic to use, which shocks Pell, but gives him all the more reason to want to train Percival. He starts punching him to get him to admit defeat and come with him to be trained, but Percival still refuses to give up. He's getting punched repeatedly, while all the villagers watch knowing that there is nothing that they can do to stop it until one boy screams out for Percival to keep fighting and gives him the motivation to unlock his magic power. The knight feels like he was tricked because Percival had told him that he had no magic, but right now, that definitely looks like magic. However, Percival is just as confused as Pell and begins to freak out after he notices the glowing light emanating from his hands. He starts flailing around trying to get rid of it and accidentally hits Pell, knocking him to the ground. Donnie tells Percival that the light must be his magic power, which gets him to calm down a bit, and as Pell gets back onto his feet, he speculates on what type of magic it could be. Maybe destruction type or enchanting type, but regardless, now that Percival has magic power of his own, he is able to fight Pell more effectively, and as such, Pell tells him to give it everything he's got. Percival rushes at Pell, and Pell swings his mace, creating a fireball aimed straight at Percival. He sees it coming and jumps out of the way to avoid it, but gets his cape caught on fire. The fireball keeps moving around, and Pell explains that this is his magic pyre. The fireball he controls continually aims for Percival, and he can do nothing but jump and duck to avoid it and not get himself roasted. Pell tells him he will never win if all he keeps doing is dodging, so Percival runs up behind him, and as he fires another fireball towards him, he spikes that shit to the ground. However, since Pell controls the flames, he uses his power to redirect the fragments of the fireball and hit Percival with all 6 of them, setting him ablaze. His magic fire has the property of never going out unless the target is burned to ash or Pell himself wants it to stop, so there is no other option for him aside from surrender. However, despite being engulfed in flames, he still chooses not to surrender to Pell despite his friends telling him he is going to die if he doesn't. He spreads his magic across his entire body to shield himself from the fire. Pell is impressed that even though he only just awakened his magic a minute ago, he is able to control it to such a degree that he can spread it throughout his body, but by now he is already medium rare, so Pell tells him to give up before the damage becomes too severe. However, due to Percival's determination, some of his magic congregates on Pell and forms a mini Percival on his arm and several more around him. They may be tiny, but those things are strong and start holding Pell's arms down, releasing the fire magic. But even with this, Percival has already become well done, so he should be down for the count. However, he starts healing himself with the magic and Pell is stood there thinking this dude must be hacking. Percival gets up dazed, but otherwise perfectly fine aside from his burnt clothes, and Pell is trying to figure out what kind of magic he could possibly possess. It's not any type that he is familiar with, so he believes it must be the elusive hero-type magic which only 1 in 10,000 possess. And if that is true, then it is highly likely that he is one of the 4 knights of the apocalypse that the prophecy foretold, meaning Ironside was correct in his assumption. Pell knows that once the other knights learn of Percival's power, they will surely come after him and try to execute him for being a threat. But he can't let such potential go to waste, so he can't let Percival go on his own. While he is thinking about all this, Percival walks up to him and punches him across the street and onto the ground. Pell praises Percival for his great control over his magic despite being a complete novice, and Percival is really happy with the compliments he is receiving, but since he is still a novice, Pell is not letting him go and starts using half of his power to break free of the mini Percivals. Even if he is talented and has a powerful magic type against a seasoned knight, he could never actually win. Donnie knows that to be true, so to save Percival, he uses his levitation magic to make Pell float in the air and tells Percival to run while he still can because there is no way he will be able to handle Pell getting serious. Percival doesn't want to run though since he still needs Pell to tell him where to find Ironside, but before long Pell gets fed up with Donnie's interference in his and Percival's fight. So he unleashes more of his power and creates a huge fireball that allows him to escape and also wounds Donnie. He wouldn't normally hurt innocent bystanders, but Donnie meddled in an honorable fight with Percival. He approaches them to finally finish the match with Percival, but then that creature that Percival met after descending the island walks in front of them, confusing Pell. It then pulls out a magic spell stone and uses it to teleport them out of the village. The three reappear on top of a dragon's backbone landmark, which is located over 30 miles away from the village they were just at. Percival wants to return there to help the others, but the fox calls him an idiot and tells him that he cannot beat Pell, and besides, Pell only came to the village looking for him. So now that he isn't there anymore, he's not going to care about the rest of the villagers and will likely just leave. Solid point, but Donnie has another point to bring up, that a talking fox. The fox tells Percival to follow him, but Percival still needs Pell to tell him where he can find Ironside. However, the fox tells him that Pell likely wouldn't know where Ironside is even though they are part of the same team. Donnie asks who Pell is anyway, and the fox explains that he is a knight that serves under an evil king and is part of a team that was tasked with finding the 4 Knights of the Apocalypse and killing them. Donnie's never heard of the Knights of the Apocalypse, but that makes sense because they don't actually exist yet, but they will soon be formed. The fox was sent back here from the future to find these knights who can oppose the Holy Knight's power: famine, pestilence, war, and death. And he has finally found one Percival, who is the Death Knight. Back at the Holy Knight's base, there is a meeting to discuss the information they know about the Knights of the Apocalypse when Pell walks in. They have learned that all of the Knights of the Apocalypse must be young boys as of now, and they have gotten some information about what they should look like. One boy with golden magic, one with eyes which hold both holiness and evil, and one with green wing-shaped hair. Ironside hears this and realizes that last one must have been referring to Percival. As he leaves, he thinks to himself about how he messed up by not making sure that Percival was dead. Pell shows up behind him and says he had thought Ironside left Percival alive on purpose because he felt guilty killing his own son, but it turns out he just failed due to plot armor. Ironside asks why he is talking as though Percival is alive, and he tells him that he knows because he just recently fought Percival. Ironside says he hopes Pell finished him off, but Pell says it would be a waste to let such potential die out so young. This causes a conflict between the two, and Ironside draws his sword, striking Pell, but Pell easily blocks it. He clarifies that it would be better to bring Percival in and train him as one of their holy knights to make sure he doesn't turn into one of the Knights of the Apocalypse. But Ironside doesn't like that idea because according to the prophecy, Percival is one day going to destroy the world. Meanwhile, Percival has just heard about the prophecy from the fox, but doesn't think it is a big deal because he just has to not destroy the world. Pretty simple. The fox says he is free to think whatever he wants, but he just has to come with him. However, Percival says he still needs to go find Ironside, so the fox tells him that he and the other knights are all in Camelot. Donnie doesn't believe him since Camelot was destroyed 16 years ago. Percival thinks the fox must have lied to him, but Fox Son tells him that it still exists, although it can't be reached by normal means. If he wants to get there, he has to go through the kingdom of Leonis, and Percival is all for it despite Donnie's protests. Donnie finally agrees to go with him since Katz and Elva will probably be fine on their own. So they head to the kingdom of Leonis, which is 200 miles away, with the fox named Sin. As they finally make it off the dragon's backbone, Percival's stomach begins to growl and he gets an idea for a competition to see who can catch the best prey for lunch. Percival takes out his bow and arrow to go hunting, but Donnie remembers what happened last time and takes away the weapons until he can actually learn how to aim. He wanders around the forest and finds a gorge which looks really interesting, so he goes into it. Meanwhile, Donnie's trying to use the bow, and he's not very good, but at least his arrows go in the direction of the target. He misses one of his targets and hits a giant nun praying in the forest. They apologize, but she says it's no big deal since it didn't do much damage. Just then, two fairies come to her and say there's a short human who went into the gorge, and that particular gorge is pretty dangerous because it contains all kinds of monsters. The same monsters that Percival is currently backhanding. After he is done with killing all the monsters, he is pretty proud of himself, but soon hears a scream coming from deeper within the gorge, where this orange guy is imprisoned and about to be experimented on. Percival helps him escape, but makes the mistake of turning his back to the villain and gets injected with some mystery fluid that knocks him out. This guy is bad news, and due to his weird tendencies to experiment on anything that has a pulse and causing the creatures in the gorge to go crazy, it's called the Mad Herbalist, Nations. Dunny and the others are still looking for Percival after he went missing, but the fairies try to convince them that it is probably better to give up on finding him because by now Nations has probably found him, and who knows what could have happened by now. Dunny asks if Nations is really all that bad of a guy, but the fairies are sure of it. They saw his weird behavior with their own eyes while he was in the forest. He had a bunny over his lap and poked it in the ass with a needle, turning it into a monster, and who wouldn't be traumatized after witnessing that shit. Knowing what kind of psycho Percival could currently be stuck with, they all hurry to try and find him before anything bad happens, and on Percival's end, he is finally woken up from the mystery injection and realizes that he has been tied to a chair with nothing but his underwear on, greatly confusing him. Just then, Nations comes back in and is surprised to see that Percival had already recovered from the effects of his injection when that tranquilizer should have been strong enough to keep him unconscious for over 10 hours. It works out for him since he still has some things he wants to test out on Percival. Percival is really upset that Nations tied him to a chair and took off all his clothes, telling him to at least give back the helmet and cloak he got from his grandpa, as they are the only things he has to remember him by. Nations turns around and says all of his clothes were tattered, so he has already burnt them all. But as for the helmet and cloak, they are still here since they are actually powerful magic items, relieving Percival. Nations then injects Percival with another mystery liquid and reminds him that he is still only a guinea pig for his experiments here. Nations says he will return in an hour since the drug should have taken effect by then, but almost immediately, Percival's hair suddenly grows even bigger than it already was. Percival is dismayed since he won't be able to put his helmet on anymore, but Nations is busy thinking about how he should be able to increase plant growth rate with this. Percival yells at Nations, accusing him of also doing evil stuff to that fairy that he kidnapped, but Nations corrects him, saying the fairy was the one who intruded and attacked him first, so it was just self-defense, and if it didn't want to become an experiment guinea pig, then it shouldn't have broken in. Even if that is true, Percival points out that he had blood dripping from his mouth when he first saw him, so he must have bitten the fairy or something. But in reality, Nations just has a bad habit of biting down on his lip whenever he gets excited. That explains the things Percival was worried about, so Nations isn't evil, but he also should probably fix that bad habit. Nations recalls that his sister always said the same thing, and that sister is the giant girl who is currently being chased by some tree monsters. Donnie tries to climb away, and the fairies blame this entire thing on Nations and his weird experiments. However, his sister adamantly denies that Nations is the type of person to do anything like this. Back with Nations, Percival now understands that he isn't necessarily evil, but he needs to be let go because there is a place he needs to go to, and Nations agrees to let him leave, but only after he is done with his experiment. It needs to be done very precisely, otherwise the backlash could very well kill Percival. He questions Nations on why he is going through all this trouble to do this. He feels no obligation to explain his actions to someone like Percival. However, as soon as he turns around, he finds that Percival has broken free of the ropes that held him and is trying to put on his helmet so he can leave because he still has his own mission to accomplish. But his hair is too big, and the helmet won't fit properly anymore. Nations can't afford to lose such a valuable test subject, so he pulls out 2 magic swords, promising not to kill Percival, but also fully intent on forcing him to stay here. Percival blocks the strikes and tries to talk to him, saying if he is in trouble, he would be glad to help him resolve it if he knew what the problem was, but Nations sees no reason to accept a stranger's help. All he needs is a guinea pig to test the drug on so that he can save the gorge. Percival falls backwards and is at the mercy of Nations. As he is about to win their fight, Percival's helmet flies off his head and strikes him in the face, knocking him back into the table he was working on. The drug he had put so much effort into goes flying across the room and is caught by Percival. He begs Percival not to do anything to the drug and promises to let him go if he returns it, because it is very important, but Percival realizes that Nations still needs to test it out, so he takes a big swig of the mystery potion and falls to the floor screaming. Nations is shocked that Percival would willingly drink the drug knowing it could possibly kill him, but it turns out it just gave him an energy boost and has him overflowing with power. Percival runs outside to yell at the top of his lungs, and the others hear this, realizing that he must be fine if he has the energy to yell that loudly. Nations questions Percival as to why he would drink something so dangerous without a second thought, but while he didn't know all the details, he knew Nations was doing it for the sake of saving the gorged, so he wanted to help him out. He asks if the drug had the desired effect, and from all indications, and the fact that Percival still possesses all his limbs, the drug seems to be a success. Nations thanks Percival for his help and introduces himself, before taking a swig of what is left of the drug and dropping to the floor. Dunny and the others come running up to the scene and is immediately shocked by Percival's new hair. He explains everything that has happened up to this point and Najin's wish to save the gorge, but the fairies are not buying that story at all. While unconscious, Najin speaks of a man named Ordo, who the fairies explain was a doctor who lived in the gorge. He was there before Najins and Dolores first arrived and was picking ingredients for his medicine when he was noticed by the fairies there. He told them that he is a medicine doctor and just wants to collect some things to make his medicine, but he also doesn't plan on becoming the enemy of the Lorax and destroy the landscape, so if they ever need medical help, they should feel free to come to him for help. Later on, they find the giant Dolores in the forest after she accelerated from her village, and after that, a baby Najins. Ordo took Najins in and raised him as his own, teaching him all about medicine making, but then one day he disappeared from the gorge altogether with no trace of him to be found. And after that happened, Najins began all his experiments. Meanwhile, the fairy that Percival had released from Najins' house plans to destroy the whole forest before Najins can do anything to save it, and to do that, he's going to use a monster he calls Ordo. Najins finally wakes up from his drug-induced coma and immediately tries to get up, saying he needs to spread the drug through the gorge to save it. However, the fairies start throwing stones at him and telling him to leave the gorge forever because they don't want him here. Percival catches these stones and tosses them back at the fairies, yelling that Najins has been working hard trying to save them this entire time, causing them to second-guess their mob actions. Soon after, the thing that Najins was trying to prevent happens, and the gorge is filled with a dense purple fog which causes all the plants and animals in the forest to immediately die as it encroaches. There is no time to spare, so Najins needs to spread the drug now. However, Percival is confused about how he plans to do that because there isn't any more of the drug left, and he doesn't have enough time to make a new batch. But this is where Najin's magic comes in handy. He can create and replicate any drug he has ingested before out of thin air. He warns everyone to cover their mouths before he uses his ability to spread the drug throughout the gorge and return life to the creatures in it. In order to know how to cure an illness, one must first know everything about the illness or poison and use that knowledge to their advantage. That is something Orbe used to tell him all the time. Later, Percival gets a haircut and some of Mason's old baby clothes to replace the ones that were burned, and the whole group of fairies begin to apologize to Najins for all their awful treatment of him, when he was only trying to help them. But he says it's fine, since while he was trying to figure out the medicine, he did actually accidentally turn some of the animals into monsters, so that part is on him. They ask him what could have possibly caused such a huge problem, but he is still unsure. After Ordo disappeared, the life in the forest started to wither away, which is what prompted him to begin his experiments. However, he never would have been able to save it if he didn't have Percival here to test the drug on him. Sin talks to Najins and tells him that the fog didn't only affect the plants and trees, but also the soil itself, leading Najins to believe that the hole in the gorge is playing some kind of role in this mess. And from that hole comes an ugly monster. This abomination shows itself, and it is apparently Ordo, or was Ordo at least. Najins tries to run over to him because he has missed Ordo for so long, but Dolores pulls him back because apparently she's the only one that has the eyes to see that something wrong is going on here. The monster Ordo fires off its breath and covers the forest in more dense fog that causes life to wither away. So Najins runs up to him and begs him to stop because he is hurting the forest. However, the only thing on Monster Ordo's mind is the destruction of the gorge, and it grabs Najins intent on crushing the life out of his little body. However, Dolores comes to the rescue and pulls Najins out from Ordo's grasp, but gets hit with the poisoned breath, leaving her with the arm in treatment. The fairy returns, and it is clear that he is the one that did this to Ordo, so basically Percival caused a huge chunk of this mess when he let him escape earlier. Najins is distraught that his grandfather was injected with the spinal fluid, but Percival promises to help get him back to normal. But even though that is his intention, there isn't exactly a book on how to fix this, and they don't have a Berthold either, so I don't see how he plans to restore Ordo. Sin tells him he might have to get rid of that fairy if he wants to get Ordo back to his previous state. However, before they can take a crack at it, the fairy gets sniped with an arrow to the forehead and falls to the ground. The others have no idea where that shot came from, but Sin directs their attention to Ordo, who collapses as well. They see a holy knight above them, and Percival yells for him to identify himself. His name is Talisker, and he is the Ember Knight of the Eternal Kingdom. Hearing that he is a holy knight, he realizes that Talisker must be friends with Ironside. Najins yells at him for what he has done to Ordo, so the knight lands on the ground, saying he will tell them everything they want to know if they can manage to land even a single hit on him. Sin warns Najins not to fall for such obvious provocation, but it's too late, and he is already in fight mode. Talisker notices that Najins has magic of both an alteration type and enchantment type, which is pretty rare as far as magic users go. Percival says he will fight alongside him, but Najin says it is too dangerous for him as someone without magic power. Percival just smiles and goes into Dragon Ball's stance to release his magic, but nothing happens. He continues to push, and eventually, a gas comes out. But it wasn't very magical. Najin thanks Percival for wanting to help, but this is something he has to do on his own. Najin rushes towards Talisker, who raises his axe to the sky and summons a storm. Sin warns Najin of the incoming attack as a wall of hailstones come crashing down on him. By every indication, Najin should be dead, but Percival somehow ran in front of him and pushed him back to avoid the hailstones. That's some serious speed right there, but he must have been on cooldown because he does nothing to react to Ordo smacking Najin away from behind. Talisker says it's time to end this and orders Ordo to finish him off, but Percival's speed cooldown must have ended because he makes it just in time to stop the lunge from hitting Najin, but for some reason decided to block it with his head instead of his hands. He isn't going to let Talisker force Ordo to kill Najin after he has spent so much effort protecting this place. Talisker yells for Ordo to finish it, but it seems Percival managed to get through to him as he begins to cry and call out to Najin. Talisker has grown tired of this, and if Ordo isn't going to listen to him, then he will just crush him along with all the others and call down another hailstorm to kill him. However, Percival's speed is back up and running again, so he leaps on top of Ordo and jumps into the air, proceeding to throw hands with a storm. The others are just standing there watching like, damn, this kid is really boxing with a storm. After he is done, Percival lands on the ground bleeding and exhausted, causing him to fall to the ground, but before he lands, Dunny slides in and catches him. Najin questions why he would do something so dangerous, but Percival just wanted to save Ordo so that Najin will eventually be able to turn him back to normal. And while Najin still isn't sure how they are going to do that, he trusts Percival's word. Talisker is about to attack again when suddenly, Percival begins to glow with a blinding yellow light, has managed to awaken his magic power again. Talisker is shocked because he has never seen magic power like Percival's own, and the Najins are equally shocked. Even though he was in really bad shape just a second ago, he is completely healed and is producing even more magic than when he faced the Black Knight. If Percival's power allows him to heal, and Talisker says he will just crush Percival so badly that there will be nothing left to regenerate from. He calls down a massive hailstorm and makes it hit exactly where Percival is standing. The hail hits the ground and Talisker is sure that he must have been turned to mince meat by an attack like that, but Percival's magic shields him by absorbing all the stones and afterwards fires them back at Talisker. He is forced to dodge and is brought to his knees as Percival walks up and reminds him of the deal they made at the beginning. If he managed to land a hit on Talisker, he has to tell him everything he wants to know and fix Ordo. Talisker yells out in a rage because he is losing and swings his axe at Percival, but the axe doesn't even draw a drop of blood. He swings at him several more times, but Percival is still standing perfectly intact. Talisker praises Percival's defensive capabilities, but he doesn't think he will ever be able to land a hit on him with those bare hands. Never mind, that will do it. Now that Percival has managed to land a hit on Talisker, he demands to know what he did to Ordo that made him like this. He was a kind person who gave medicine to the fairies and took in a stray giant. Why does he have to suffer like this? Talisker says that's the problem since saving other beings aside from humans is outrageous. So he is racist. He says that what King Arthur desires is a world where all the other inferior races have been eliminated and only the pure-blooded humans can live in peace. Talisker had warned Ordo not to aid the other races in the forest, but he didn't listen to the warning and continued to help them, which is why he turned Ordo into a monster. Percival thinks that is the dumbest reason he has ever heard for turning someone into a monster, but Talisker stands firm by his racism. He then uses his magic to control the weather once more and summon lightning upon Percival. The blast is a direct hit, but it does no damage once more as Percival's magic shields him and absorbs the lightning. He runs towards Talisker with the lightning and uses it as his own attack while Talisker has finally recognized him as one of the foretold 4 Knights of the Apocalypse. He manages to dodge Percival and thinks this is a good opportunity to make sure that the prophecy does not come to pass by killing Percival. The others go to Percival and tell him that his power seems to take the shape of whatever he imagines, so he should imagine a weapon. But make sure it is not a bow because Percival still sucks at using those. Talisker uses his strongest attack, forming a bird from all the power he has, and this creates an image in Percival's mind at the time he cut up a rock bird for dinner. So he forms a knife and gets the others to let him cook. In an instant, the magic bird is sliced up perfectly and ready for seasoning, but before that, Percival launches his knife at Talisker, knocking him into the cliff. Talisker has been defeated, so Sin tells Percival that he can deactivate his magic now, which he tries to do, but Percival doesn't know how. Donnie turns around and finds that Dolores is actually alright, but she's black now. Sin explains that she used a skill called heavy metal, which giants are able to use to protect themselves. Nations is happy to see that she is still alive, but Ordo is still a monster right now. He recalls the dream that Ordo had about curing the illness of everyone, including all the other races, and begins to cry, saying he will protect the valley for the sake of Ordo. Percival is watching this and feels bad for not being able to keep his promise to get Ordo back to normal. Then Sin manages to find a purple stick that was dropped by Talisker before he was defeated by Percival, and as soon as he destroys it, Ordo begins to transform and revert back to his old self, and somehow regenerates his clothes as well. They are all overjoyed to have him back, and Nations runs over to him crying and gives him a big hug. Later, Donnie is having a laugh about how Nations was all serious earlier, but as soon as he saw Ordo again, he broke down in tears. But Percival says it's not a bad thing, since he would love it if he were able to see his dead grandpa again. Donnie realizes he stepped on a conversational landmine and tries to change the subject. He asks Sin what the stick that transformed Ordo was, and is informed that it was a staff of chaos which King Arthur gives his subordinates to hold the power of chaos. Percival gets up and says he has decided what he is going to do. He got blown away by his father, and here he had to fight Talisker as well. So he's going to go after the one giving all the orders and beat up the king of Camelot so no one else is hurt. Donnie thinks this is crazy talk, but Sin is supportive and says they are going to need to prepare for it. First, they are going to aim for Linus, but Percival's stomach growls, reminding him of the game they were playing to see who would catch the most animals. Donnie couldn't catch a single thing, but while Percival caught a bunch, he doesn't have any of them here to show, but Sin does. Sin wins the competition, and so he becomes the leader and can give orders to them now. Before they leave, they hear Nations calling to them from a distance and wait for him to catch up. He says he wants to follow them on their journey, but Percival wonders why. He says he wants to help because Percival saved the valley and Ordo, but he says he doesn't need to be paid back. Nations insists, as Ordo also told him to leave the valley to travel the world and learn more about it. Donnie is against the idea, but Sin agrees to it and orders him to accept Nations in their group because his mastery of poison and magic could prove to be useful during their journeys. Percival welcomes him with open arms, and Nations is just happy to be a part of a team with the first person he could ever call a friend. This was the end of episode 5. Thanks for watching. Subscribe for more.